came here for the love of an animal, stayed for the love of a man. When he died tragically, Alexandra remained because she'd fallen in love again with this place, the Broughton Archipelago. Now it's under siege, and Alex is fighting back.
They come into my home and try to wreck it. Well, I'm not going to just sit there and watch.
Alexandra Morton is a hero or a crackpot, depending on how you feel about fish farms.
Good morning from Tender Harbor.
First of all, I'd like to acknowledge a true hero.
I think she is blinded by her own fanaticism on this issue.
We have the best salmon growing conditions in the world, right next door to the biggest salmon market in the world, and we got to take advantage of that.
You're ready to shut us down, but you got to help us.
Okay,
Sure we'll help. We'll push the government to regulate you onto the land.
We're accepting this shit here that's poisoning us.
Alexandra Morton is my guest. She's, of course, a biologist, a whale researcher. She's the whistleblower from Broughton Archipelago.
"300 kilometers north along the west coast of Canada from Vancouver, the Broughton Archipelago harbors 24 fish farms, among the highest concentrations in the world. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of farmed salmon are exported from British Columbia every year, mostly to California. 20 years ago, the first Atlantic salmon farms were seen as the salvation of dwindling wild Pacific stocks. Now there's growing concern that aquaculture will mean just the opposite: the extinction of the Pacific wild salmon, perhaps the cleanest protein left on Earth. Alexandra Morton does not mean to let it happen. The wild salmon are a direct link to everything she loves. (1979). Alexandra, 22 years old and just out of university, heads north from California to Alert Bay, British Columbia. She's been studying whales in captivity, trying to decipher their communication, and has made her way to northern Vancouver Island looking for the wild family of one of her captive subjects. As she sits with her volunteer crew on the Alert Bay dock, just before nightfall of their first day, the orca find Alex.
Suddenly we hear like that. I thought they were gunshots. Coming from LA, I'd heard gunshots and whip around, and there's these silver plumes just rising one after the next from this jet black water, and these fins coming up, silver and glistening. And it was a mixture of fear and sheer delight. So we untied the boat and we idled out there very timidly, and I put the hydrophone down, and I immediately heard whew, which is one of the signature calls of the A-clan whales that I'm studying.
Alexandra has found her life's work.
It was really a groundbreaking time for killer whale work. Very, very little was known about them. It was just becoming understood that they probably weren't going to attack your boat.
Soon after, Alexandra meets the human love of her life.
Suddenly, this guy walks out of the water who's been down fixing the camera up. And he takes off his entire wetsuit. There's nothing on underneath. And there's this killer whale tattooed to his shoulder. And I was just like, who is this man?
Is that right? It's good.
Robin Morton has left a career as a news cameraman to photograph killer whales. Much of the orca footage in this documentary is his. Robin invites young Alexandra to witness a newly discovered wonder of the orca world: killer whales rubbing themselves on the rocks at Robson Bight. Their love affair is sealed by mutual passion for the whales.
I could see the biggest male in the group, A5, top notch, actually doing complete somersaults, putting his nose in the pebbles and rubbing his nose, turning upside down, doing the back of his head, the back of his tail. It was a miracle to me. Yeah, so we just fell in love right away, and pretty well went home, packed up, and moved in with him.
By New Year's 1982, they're married with a baby boy, who'll later say he was raised in a zodiac, following the whales.
The lovely thing about 2-year-olds is they don't know how odd their parents are, and they'll go along with anything.
One chilly October afternoon, the whales lead them into a wild maze of islands, about 300 kilometers north along the BC coast from Vancouver, the Broughton Archipelago.
We were traveling the coast then, living in a boat, and every nice bay we were sizing it up. And what we wanted was communication with the outside world, other children for our little boy, whales, and protected waters to work in. Echo Bay was all of those. And so we spent one night, went back and got the boat and moved in, and I've never wanted to leave since. I love it here.
To every question the young couple ask about whales, they're told, "You should ask Billy Proctor."
Well, I've been here all my life. Never lived anywhere else like right here. So. This is the first artifact I found when I was 5 years old. It's a little jade knife or hide scraper. Well, the first time I met her and Robin at Echo Bay, they were looking for whales, and she come along and asked me a bunch of questions if I'd seen any whales. And I thought, oh my God, another whale watcher coming around, because there was lots of them at that time.
Within the first few minutes of talking to him, I'm scrambling for a notepad to start writing it down, because the man has such a memory. Most of the time when you talk to people on the coast, you say, "Do you see whales?" They can hardly remember. But this guy's saying, "Oh yeah, humpbacks. We saw 2 humpbacks in 1980 in Bond Sound. Killer whales, they always go up Knight's Inlet just before a southeast storm." And yeah, Billy's been a mentor and a guide ever since.
The early 80s are the best of times for Alexandra. Young and in love with a man who shares her desire to spend every waking moment with killer whales.
It was, you know, it's like a crystalline moment in my life now, being young and this wonderful man and this baby and discovering this beautiful place. And it was really wonderful.
A few months before Jarrett's 4th birthday, a foggy September morning, the family heads back to the spot where Robin and Alexandra first met. Robin is bursting with joy. Filmmaking legend Jacques Cousteau needs Robin's underwater orca footage. It's that rare. And Robin is determined to get more. He slips into the water as Alex watches from the inflatable.
You know, I can see him. He's got his head up and he's just bobbing and just outside of a kelp bed along a dark cliff. And I have Jarrett in the boat, and suddenly this female whale, Eve, surfaces right beside my boat. Whoa, she's going in right for him. You know, I'm thinking, by God, he is gonna get another 3.5 minutes. You know, this is a perfect setup. The visibility's good. So he dove down, and within just seconds, that whale is just peeling out of there. And it was like film in reverse, you know. He said to me over and over and over again, "Don't interrupt the shot." It was like time went into some kind of warp. It just felt very weird. And I'm really trying to figure out what I should do here. There are more whales coming in, but this female's out of there. Robin's not coming up. Then I start up the motor. You know, I head in there, and I look down the bottom, and he's lying down there with his arms straight up in the air because his gloves are floating. You know, he's got air in the hands, and he's unconscious. The camera's rolling down the beach, you know, about 25, 30 feet down. And next thing I know, I'm in the water. I've tied a line to myself and to the boat. So I'm tied to Jarrett. You know, 30 feet's kind of down there. It's pretty cold water. And in the end, I was able to grab him with my feet and bring him up. And yeah, he was gone. One of the bizarre thoughts that came into my mind at that time was that it was not that unlike my son being born. There's these moments in which there's cracks in the world and there's a coming and a going. And for some reason, they felt the same to me, the coming of my son when he was born and the leaving of Robin. And it was just, you know, it was just a cascade of implosions, you know, from what to do in the next 10 minutes to having lost, you know, all of this. It was, you just don't get over it. You know, he's still really, really a part of me.
Robin Morton drowned because his breathing device failed. 18 years later, he remains Alex's guardian angel. She needed him to raise their son alone in the wilderness. She needs his strength now for the battle ahead. After months of debilitating depression over her young husband's tragic death, the whales draw Alex back out onto the water.
Got A11, A34 and her calf, A13, and new baby. What should we call it?
Present.
Present? We could try it for a while, unless it grows up to be a big bull. Then we might have to change its name, but I'll put that down. And Present showed up on Mother's Day.
She scrambles to support her son and stay near her whales. Freelance writing, selling Robin's precious footage. Working for some years, commercial fishing with Billy Proctor.
She was feeling nausea a lot of times, but she just grinned and bared it and stayed on. And she was very good at dressing fish and washing fish and cooking fish, because was a vegetarian back then, and she can cook fish more ways than any woman I ever seen.
Every spare moment, Alex works recording the movement of killer whales through Broughton Archipelago, identifying each one.
It's mother and son there, Sitka and Pointer.
She becomes an expert in orca communication.
Time is 0829. We're just west of Lizard Point with the A30s. When I record the killer whale sounds, I have a microphone that goes onto the same tape, but on a different track, so that I can correlate what are the whales saying when they're feeding? What are the whales saying when they're turning around? They would appear to be feeding on sockeye. You can see the fish jumping amongst them. You don't get a chance to see their whole body, and you don't get a chance to see them most of the time. All you do is see them when they're breathing. But for the orca, the breathing is very important. They associate in their matrilineal lines when they breathe, and you see adult sons that are 24 years old with their mothers. They're still breathing in synchrony.
Her own son goes to the tiny Echo Bay school and thrives. But there's the constant worry that the school will have to close. Not enough kids. Then in 1987, help arrives, or at least appears to, in the form of fish farms.
When I first saw the first one go by behind a little tugboat, my first thought was, good idea. I thought more children for our school. relief for the wild fish. And I thought they would provide shelter in a storm for me because I was wandering around out there in my speedboat by myself. But they turned out to be the storm.
In 1987, Echo Bay and the Broughton looked good to big fish farming corporations. Sheltered, isolated, not very populated. In just 7 years, 25 farms will dot the archipelago. There's big money to be made, marketing a then politically correct alternative to overfished wild stocks.
This is the last event in a 3-day excursion for the editors, sponsored by the Salmon Farming Association.
The news is yet to come about disease transfers between farmed and wild fish.
Workers are cleaning the pens out after an outbreak of IHN, a naturally occurring virus.
About PCB levels in farmed Atlantic salmon.
Farm salmon feed is thought to be the main culprit for those high toxin levels.
The only aquaculture alarm bell that rings at all is about farmed Atlantics escaping into the wild. And it'll be years before divers film surviving Atlantic salmon in Pacific spawning grounds. In the late 80s, the Department of Fisheries doesn't appear worried.
The DFO prompted people would say, well, the salmon can't escape. If they do escape, they can't survive. If they do survive, they can't get into the rivers. If they do get into the rivers, they can't spawn. And if they do spawn, the spawn won't come back. Well, the last one is still undetermined, but all the rest of them have been demonstrably proven to be rubbish.
For the first time, our cameras are able to document the existence of Atlantic salmon in waters once the exclusive domain of Pacific salmon. And we're not just talking about one fish.
In Echo Bay in 1989, Billy Proctor is cautiously optimistic about the economic boom aquaculture could bring to the Broughton. But he wants to protect the wild things too. So Billy and other local fishermen take part in the provincial government's Coastal Resource Inventory. They give up their secrets, reveal rich fishing spots where no fish farm should go. Alex still feels guilty about her part in persuading them to participate.
They were resistant, and I was very frustrated. I said, they're coming to you. They're asking you what needs to be protected. You have got to tell them, because if you don't, they're not going to know what to protect.
A lot of people give up a lot of secret information that we really didn't want to do, but we thought it would be beneficial for the country, but we kind of neglected. Kind of were sorry afterwards we'd done it.
Red was supposed to mean no farms, too biologically sensitive. Today, red is the color Billy and Alex still see when they think back to that time.
You know what the definition of the red zone was? It was they would not even accept an application for fin fish farming.
Yeah.
I remember Billy going, right from the start, you were saying they were putting them all in the wrong places. There was actually more farms in the red zones than there was in the green or the yellow.
Yeah.
They lied to us. But,
yeah, they sure did on that one.
It will be the first in a series of betrayals. But these two will prop each other up and keep on fighting. In the early 90s, aquaculture skeptics like Billy Proctor are truly voices in the wilderness. Since the farms are in his backyard, Billy's been doing a lot of reading about millions of salmon escaping farms in Norway and about diseases wiping out wild runs there.
I've had a love affair with fish since I was 4 years old, and I love fish. I like handling fish, and I like to look after them. Won't be long, it'll be up here.
Every autumn, Billy and neighbors wait for a full moon tide to head upriver for the annual salmon harvest. Stocking a fish hatchery that Billy started 25 years ago to rebuild a salmon creek devastated by logging.
So this community, virtually every man, woman, and child, has helped bring those fish back.
They catch a few fish for their eggs and sperm, brood stock for the hatchery.
That's it. When it's foams like that, that's all the little sperm swimming makes the foam.
In 1991, hatchery fish began mysteriously dying. The Federal Department of Fisheries checks, and it's a bacterial disease called furunculosis.
I'd never even heard of the word furunculosis in my life, and I've been playing with fish since I was a kid, you know. All of a sudden, it's an everyday byword.
2 years later, it happens again. And common sense makes Billy suspect an infection from the fish farms, quarantined because of furunculosis.
Well, I asked him, I questioned him. I said, how do you quarantine a farm when the tide's running by at 3 knots? And I flew around the farms one day, and you couldn't see any water for dead fish floating. There was that many fish on the surface. They all float when they get that furunculosis.
And so I said to the government, what strain of furunculosis do you have on your fish farms? They said, don't worry about that, Ms. Morton. It's different.
The fish farming industry's stand. Don't blame us.
To the best of my knowledge, there has not been a single example of farmed diseases from farm fish moving into wild populations.
By the early 1990s, Alexandra Morton, whale researcher, is becoming Alex Morton, thorn in the side of fish farmers and governments. The federal government in charge of protecting the wild fish, the province which oversees the farms.
I wrote over 10,000 pages of letter, arguing these out, researching the situation, saying, look, here's what the science says in Norway, Scotland, and Ireland. Here's what's happening here. I think we've got the same situation as is happening in Norway. I think our wild stocks are going to collapse.
She argues to keep one of the main wild salmon migration routes in the archipelago free of farms.
An ace in the hole. Then if something, whatever, goes wrong, you've still got 50% of your wild fish.
Although more and more of her time goes into the fish farm campaign, Alex still runs to her boat at the first sound of a killer whale.
Well, I'm not entirely sure yet, but it looks like the three brothers, the 836s. And, oh, no, there's more. There really are more.
In early 1993, Alex hears a sound that makes her rip the headset from her ears. The sound of an acoustic harassment device used underwater by fish farmers in an attempt to keep seals away. This ticking sound, amplified to 194 decibels, louder than a jet taking off.
The killer whales and the seals have the same hearing range, the same peak sensitivity, which is very typical between predator and prey. And so when they turned these devices on, it was like the door was slammed in the face of the killer whales. They would come in one at a time, one family at a time, hear this, and never come back again.
This loss echoes the heartbreak of losing her husband. Since the orca were a bridge to Robin over the chasm of death, Alex wonders if it's time for her to abandon the Broughton. The summer of 1993, her son moves away for high school, her whales are gone, and Alexandra Morton considers leaving the archipelago. Then fate intervenes in the form of a handsome tugboat operator. He asks to tie up at her dock one night, and within months, they are living together.
We're at Smith Rock. About 50 dolphins, including at least 3 or 4 real youngsters, half-size.
2 years later, Alex is pregnant and focusing her professional attention on a marine species which still frequents the Broughton, the Pacific white-sided dolphin.
They're pushing a big bow wave and the fish are in it. Well, they've got those fish on the run.
Baby Cleo, born at the end of 1995, is named for a channel in the Broughton. Appropriate, since she spends her infancy with her mom and Billy Proctor making the rough 3-hour crossing to Vancouver Island for salmon aquaculture review meetings. It's the result of a breakthrough. The BC government says no new fish farms while they study the environmental impact. The 49 recommendations that come out of the review are still slowly making their way through the industry when the next wave hits, June 5th, 2001. One of Alex's neighbors, a fishing guide, brings her 2 lice-riddled smolts, juvenile salmon.
The cords were standing out on his neck. He was upset. He knew that these lice on here were not natural. He also knew that this had been the same thing that happened in Scotland, because he has guests that were coming to fish at his lodge from Scotland because there were no more sea trout or Atlantic salmon for them to catch. I looked at them and I didn't know what to do, but I thought, I wonder if I can catch these. I wonder if I can have a look around, see how widespread this is. And I went to Fife Sound and I dipped along the wall. I could see, a whole ribbon of these little fish. They all looked like this or worse. Then I went to the Birdwoods. Oh, they looked the same. Then I went to Tribune Channel. Then I went to Kinkham Inlet. Then I went down to Knights Inlet. Everywhere as I went, I found these, and I began to look for the edge of the infection. At what point did we find clean fish? So then I went and traveled up towards the rivers where I knew these fish were coming out of. And within a few kilometers of the rivers, they hadn't passed a farm yet, they looked fine. It was devastating because my previous experience with the bureaucracy and the federal government, the provincial government, the industry, was that there was nobody I could tell. There was nobody I could say, there's an epidemic going on. These fish don't look like they're going to make it. Could you fix this? I got on the internet and I began to type messages. I'm finding lots of sea lice on pink salmon. Can someone help me? And I'll never forget when I got an answer from Jens Christian Holst. He said, what's your problem? Well, then I said, I'm finding up to 68 of these lice on a fish that's only 6 centimeters long. And he types back,
it would be interesting to know whether there is salmon fish farms in the area.
I typed back, yes, we have 27 sites in this archipelago.
Alexandra's emails have made their way to Bergen, Norway, to the Institute of Marine Research. Dr. Jens Christian Holst is a senior scientist there and a world expert in sea lice. He's been waiting for this bad news from the Pacific.
We've seen this problem turning up in all the areas, I think, or almost all areas where Atlantic salmon has been farmed.
The world's leading producer of farmed salmon, Norway got into the industry in the 60s. By the 90s, it was big business. When reports of sea lice devastating wild runs began emerging, Dr. Holst, with his government's backing, launched a huge 7-year research project.
We have estimated mortality from these infections ranging up to about 90%, and sea lice infections is regarded a major threat to many Norwegian salmon stocks today.
Spurred on by the news from Norway, and with Dr. Holst's guidance, in the spring of 2001, Alex pulls together a fast study of juvenile salmon passing the Broughton fish farms.
I developed a twitch. All I did for that first year was collect these fish, bring them home, look at them under the microscope, count them, wrote a paper on it.
Of 751 juvenile pinks she examines, 75% are infected with lethal doses of lice. She writes to the Department of Fisheries, trying to sound the alarm.
When those baby fish came back as adults, my data said 81% of them should have died.
Without the abundant pink runs, what will happen to the eagles, the bears, the forest itself? Fish farmers think she's being hysterical.
There simply isn't any proof that lice from salmon farms are infecting and harming wild salmon.
fish live here, Mom?
I'll tell you one thing we do know is that the farm salmon have got the sea lice from the wild salmon. That is a fact.
A fact no one disputes. In the late summer, adult salmon bring the sea lice home from the open ocean. The lice need salty water to survive, so they die when the fish go upriver to spawn. Long gone by the time the vulnerable smolts head out in the spring. Or they were. Fish farms containing millions of Atlantic salmon now supply a plentiful year-round host. Alexandra means to prove beyond a doubt that lice coming from the farms are killing the wild salmon upon which the Broughton Archipelago depends.
The pink salmon in particular, because they're so abundant, bring all these nutrients up the rivers, straight up the sides of mountains, and feeds this entire ecosystem, which basically is draining away all the time. All the nutrients are running downhill. If you didn't have those fish bringing it back up, you wouldn't have the trees, you wouldn't have the bears, you wouldn't have the eagles, you wouldn't have the wolves. You know, you'd have nothing.
Weeks after Alex sounds the alarm, the Canadian Department of Fisheries mounts its own sea lice study. They catch just 7 pinks in the Broughton, find an average of 3 lice on each, and declare the pinks in good condition. In October of 2001, the Department of Fisheries notifies Alexandra that she's under investigation for collecting samples without a scientific license and could be liable to a fine of $500,000 and 2 years in prison. The next spring, 2002, the provincial government lifts a 7-year moratorium on fish farm expansion.
Shame on you!
There's been an extensive amount of research done, all of which confirm that aquaculture is a low risk to the environment.
The Salmon Farmers Association predicts 100 more farms along the coast in 10 years. In the autumn of 2002, the pink salmon runs up and down the coast are abundant. But in the Broughton Archipelago, silence. And then all hell breaks loose.
When they were expected back, it was the fall of 2002. 98% of them vanished. I was shocked. When my data said 81% of these fish are going to die, I thought, I've done something wrong here with the math. The natural system's going to somehow make up for this. The more fish will survive, you know, the ones that don't have lice will have a better chance at survival.
The Department of Fisheries doesn't actively pursue its fishing without a license case against Alex for collecting smolt samples. But neither do they accept her findings, her dire predictions of a complete collapse. The DFO sticks with its prediction that 3.6 million pink salmon will return to the Broughton in the fall of 2002. The year's total, for all 7 rivers, 147,000. Tourists grab home video of hungry grizzly bears pacing the riverbanks. It's awful news, but suddenly people are paying attention.
The best thing that an animal can have right now on this planet is the love of a group of humans. And the salmon certainly have that.
I say people, you say power, people! Power! People! Power!
Alex is painfully aware that her first sea lice study in 2001 was fast and small. The next spring, she's at it again, and the next.
I've been catching more fish every year. The first year that I did this work, I started late, and I looked at 800. And then the next year, I looked at fish from 5 different areas, and I looked at just under 2,000. This year, this fish is number 1,619, and I still have another 5 weeks, and each of those weeks has about 120 fish. So I'll be well over 2,000 again.
Somehow, Alex keeps going, while government ignores her and industry denigrates her.
Alex doesn't really have the credentials she should have to be doing this kind of biological work. If Alex is actually saying she has a connection between fish farms and the collapse of the pink salmon run, then she isn't a scientist.
Industry says the collapse is part of a natural cycle, but people aren't buying it. In the spring of 2003, the gathering wave of public opposition turns into a tsunami. The British Columbia government does an about-face and announces the fallow of several Broughton fish farms. They'll empty the pens during the young salmon's spring migration.
What we want to do there is open up a channel for the smolts to swim out to the sea.
Soon after, a major restaurant chain goes proudly wild, banning farm salmon from their menu. First Nations in the Broughton launch a lawsuit against government and the fish farm industry.
It is an action commenced by writ of summons in BC Supreme Court alleging negligence, nuisance, and breach of fiduciary duty.
American consumers launch a lawsuit against 3 major supermarket chains for not labeling their farmed salmon artificially colored.
I'd say this guy is about a 24.
And young academics start coming to the Broughton to study sea lice.
He's looking at lice loads on the wild fish at intervals around farms. It increases the number of witnesses that are looking into all of this, and it makes it harder for anyone to discredit the science.
Johnstone Strait in August. 2 hours from the Broughton, this is where Alex Morton goes now to find whales. They come home to mid-coastal British Columbia following the salmon. But even though acoustic harassment devices are illegal now, orca rarely enter the Broughton anymore.
Hello. Oh. I hear their vocalizations and I feel a whole shift in my being. I feel relaxed. I feel happy. I want to be with them. They're a magnet.
Every week, Alex pulls herself away and makes the journey home. The summer of 2003 is a difficult time personally. Alex and Cleo's father are separating.
I can definitely see myself being a difficult person to live with because I have so much passion for something outside of the relationship. I think men get jealous of that, maybe, perhaps feel less, which wasn't the case. But I'm in a completely different situation now than I was when I was first a single mom. I know the ropes here, and I really just want to get down to brass tacks and do this job. And my daughter is #1, but after that, it's all of the work. And that would be difficult for someone to live with. These are the fish that have come all through the Broughton. And if the provincial plan to fallow the farms worked, then these fish should be in fairly good condition. It's simply not known how long the young salmon spend in this area. And so by testing every week since March, I'm getting an idea of what a tremendous nursery area the Broughton Archipelago is. Nobody knew this before. Everybody said when they reach 5 centimeters in length, they move offshore back in June. But here it is August and they're still here. It's August 15th, and I'm not only looking at the little salmon going out, but now I'm looking at the big salmon coming back in. And up and down the coast, the rivers and the estuaries are wall to wall with pink salmon. Here in the Broughton, we still have silence. We don't hear them jumping. There's a few coming in, which is great, but not the abundance we expected.
When First Nations fisheries officers walk the rivers in September, the news isn't much better.
Nothing here, Joe. Pretty much what we've seen last week.
The Department of Fisheries counts a few more fish, but essentially confirms that although the salmon runs up and down the coast are again abundant, few return to the Broughton. Still in Echo Bay in September, Alex finds reason for hope.
What I'm finding this year is much lower lice levels than I've seen for the previous 2 years. So these fish went through a route that had all but one of the fish farms fallow. There's absolutely no farm fish in it, and lice dropped tenfold.
But the very next day, Alex finds one of the fallowed farms has been restocked, and she believes it's unlikely the farm will be emptied for next spring's outward migration.
They're not going to be big enough to harvest. They have to be in the water now for 18 months.
Her scientific cool evaporates.
I despise death that they stand for. There's not a scene of life, that's a scene of destruction. I don't say that lightly. I've looked at 4,000 fish from that area. They're all dying. And we're going to look back when this is all over, and we are going to be horrified that we let this go on. Allowed the bloodstream of this coast to be killed for an industry that's just a flash in the pan. As soon as people get tired of eating this stuff, they'll be gone. But what will be left? That's the only question, is what will be left?
Alex knows our species has difficulty connecting the planet's well-being with our own. But we sure take notice when our health is directly affected. The new year brings powerful reinforcements.
Aquaculture is booming, but it has been hampered by a host of problems, most of them environmental and health-oriented.
Early in 2004, Science magazine publishes a major study.
Most disturbingly, the study found significantly higher concentrations of PCBs, dioxins, and other toxins in farm salmon.
The news swiftly circumnavigates the globe, and sales of farm salmon plummet. Yet the British Columbia government talks about expanding aquaculture north, almost to Alaska, threatening all West Coast salmon. And there's no sign that Broughton farms will be fallowed again for the spring migration, although Alex's research shows that emptying the pens worked. Personally, for Alex, the new year brings vindication. Her first 2 years sea lice studies have been accepted for publication in scientific journals. Maybe, just maybe, authorities will listen now, while there are still wild salmon to save.
Everything was so beautiful that Laura wanted it to stay forever. But Pa said it was time for little girls to go to bed.
The underwater world of the Broughton inhabits even Alexandra's dreams. Once, she dreamt of sea lice crawling on little Cleo. She often dreams of Orca explaining their calls to her. And of course, she dreams of Robin.
He comes to me all the time in dreams and confirms that he's still a part of me, and that's important. It's actually written on what he last said on my windowsill in front of my desk where I write.
What he last said?
Yeah, in a dream. Yeah, well, I just have to read it. I don't want to say it. It's his words.
It's been quite a journey, from young bride to matriarch. From researcher blissfully alone in paradise with her orca subjects to reluctant activist, drawing the world's attention to Echo Bay. As spring approaches, Alex waits for the unlikely news that the farms will be fallowed again. to allow the young salmon to safely pass by. It is not the most she wants, not an end to aquaculture in the Broughton, or even the permanent closure of farms on one of the salmon migration routes. But it's a beginning, a step towards her dream of a time when the Broughton again belongs to the whales.
The return of the whales is my plumb line in life. I will always, I hope, be waiting and watching. And you have to watch very, very closely for sign of whales passing because they don't leave tracks. And so that means I have to stay here and I have to always be aware. I want to make this place habitable for whales again. I want to give this place back to them. They deserve it.